You know, when The Hand came out in 1991, guided by Oliver Stone and starring Michael Caine, it was ripe for parody, including a very interesting Dave Thomas version on SCTV. But there was one reviewer who said, well, you know, it harkens back to an episode of Night Gallery with The Hand had a very bizarre plot based on a book that really didn't make any sense when it came out. But this version of the Night Gallery of The Hand motif, the title is called The Hand of Borgus Weems, but it should be called The Crackpot of Bogus Thrillers. Now, this Night Gallery episode, season 2, and a lot of good producers and creators and actors were tied to it. David Jules, Blogspot, give it 3 stars out of 4. I can give it 2.5 because for what it is, it's kind of interesting, the concept, because it plays like an old DC Comics horror comic book. Now, teleplay of The Hand of Borgus Weems by Alan Simpinsley, story based on The Other Hand by George Langeland, directed by John Meredith Lucas, with the very underrated George Maharis as Peter Lackland, Oscar winner Ray Milland as Dr. Archibald Ravdon, Joan Huntington as Susan Douglas, Patricia Donahue as Dr. Enoch Enti, and Peter Mamakos as Detective Nico Kazanakis. William Mims as Brock Ramsey, and Robert F. Hoy as Everett Winterreich. The story begins with Peter, played by George Maharis, driving in a crowded city street. Great scene, he can't seem to control his hand or his foot. Suddenly he drives right at a pedestrian, hits him, and crashes. The pedestrian is uninjured but glares at him. Very interesting angles on the scene. Now, after seeing an ad on a bus, he visits Dr. Archibald and asks the doctor to cut off his hand. Ravdon asks why, and Lachlan writes a prescription in Latin, a language he doesn't know, and adds, "It makes my hand do things I don't want to do. It tried to commit murder 3 times, but Lachlan stopped it, or himself, or whatever." Now, the doctor refuses to amputate the hand under such conditions and wants to refer Lachlan to a psychiatrist, and Lachlan proceeds to pick up a large heavy paperweight and brings it down with full force on the evil hand, smashing it into uselessness, thus forcing Ravdon to remove the hand out of medical necessity. Now, explaining in a series of flashbacks to Dr. Ravdon, who was later joined by psychiatrists, Lachlan begins that a while back he was to have a business meeting at a man's apartment, and while at the buzzers got distracted and pushed the wrong one. He goes up to the wrong apartment and meets Susan Douglas, launching a very whirlwind courtship that ended up with them engaged 3 days later. However, things took a near violent turn due to the hand, and Lachlan has restored to demanding that Susan keep away from him so he won't kill her. The incidental music, Jules says, here is a little ironic and irritating, but kind of creepy in an early 70s futuristic synthesizer sort of way. Now, he says he first consciously thought he was not in control of his hand when he was leafing through the phone book when suddenly his hand stopped. Then it called the number he had stopped on. It was almost as though I weren't there, only my hand, he explains. A man answers the phone and the hand writes, "Borgus Weems." The man says this is Borgus Weems speaking. Freaked out, Lachlan hangs up and burns the paper the name was written on. Not a single one of those actions was performed by me or my own free will. Now, later at his apartment, a man called Brock Ramsey, played by William Mims, arrives and says he knew someone who lived at Lachlan's place 5 or 6 years ago. The hand reaches for a letter opener. Ramsey says he has reason to believe Lachlan phoned him earlier when he called Borgus Weems. The hand raises up with the weapon. The phone rings. Ramsey says, "Please, you don't understand," and Lachlan managed to get the hand to drop the letter opener. It's Susan calling. Days later, driving to visit a client, Lachlan realizes his foot is cooperating with the hand. Here we have a reprise of the opening scene where he tried to run down a pedestrian. Afterwards, he begins to plan to murder Susan. He buys a gun, says his brain was now cooperating with the hand, concealing his own true thoughts. He goes to Susan's place, draws the gun, then pulls it back as his brain fights itself. He then moves the gun towards his own head, but Susan pushes it away. It goes off harmlessly, except perhaps to whatever furniture it may have hit. He tells her to leave. Now, back in real time, Dr. Ravdon has a policeman visit Lachlan at home. He knows about Weems. 4 years ago, Weems was pushed to his death from a window in this very apartment. In that act, his right hand was lopped off at the wrist. The cop thinks Weems' niece Susan and her boyfriend Ramsey did it. The lawyer who got them off was the man Lachlan tried to run down in the street. Weems used Lachlan as an instrument of revenge, the cop concludes. Now, Dr. Ravedon then starts to write a tranquilizer prescription for Lachlan, but it's in Latin. The cop happens to read Latin and translates, "It's from Virgil, arise my avenger out of my bones." Ravden looks up, realizing Weems' hands is now possessing his, and with an expression of shock and fear says, "Good Lord," as our story comes to a conclusion. Now, according to Jewell, this is a deliberately paced segment, and it kept him thoroughly interested throughout, all the way to surprising, chilling conclusion. For me, it was a half and half, because it just it was too drawn out. It could have been like 5 minutes quicker. Now, Milland, of course, a big star of the 40s and 50s. He remained active, mostly in television, up until his death in the mid-80s. At this point in his career, he was in the first of an unrelated trilogy of sci-fi tales that, let's be honest, were not roles as dignified as those he had played for, among others. The next year, 72, he would star as a rich man who hates nature and gets his comeuppance by frogs, and somewhat hilariously, it has to be seen to believe, as a rich racist who plans to prolong his life by having his head attached to another body, and whose head is attached to the body of a black former football player, Rosa Greer. Except Greer's head is still on, and they become the thing with two heads. I think what happened with Milland, he wanted to keep busy, but Ray Milland, pound for pound, one of the better actors of different roles. And what was interesting, like Night Gallery, just like Love Boat and Hotel later on, a lot of the old veterans of Hollywood would show up in the Night Gallery, and that would draw a lot of interest. At the time, ladies and gentlemen, new actors weren't dominating certain shows. It was the same recycled actors, and you don't see that as much in 2022, but back in 1970s was par for the course, and Fantasy Island another version. What do you call dramatic anthologies or dramatic series, or what I call Alfred Hitchcock styles? But The Hand of Borgus Weems, again, on retrospect, seeing how strange the movie The Hand was, Oliver Stone, we call them cocaine movies. So if you're going to have an afternoon about this, watch the Hand of Borgus Weems first, then watch The Hand, then watch Dave Thomas playing Michael Caine in the movie The Hand on SCTV. It's like the third version is like a Mad Magazine parody. But this episode has a lot of fans, ladies and gentlemen. David Jewell and ever. I wouldn't give it. He gives it 3 stars out of 4. I give it about 2 because George Maharis, sometimes I like him and sometimes he doesn't. And like I said, there was a lot of things going on in his personal life I don't want to get into, but a lot of people felt he was a two-face by not admitting his real self, and he kind of played the macho man in TVs and stuff like that, where he wasn't in real life. But Ray Milland can carry anybody to the finish line, because he was given some shitty scripts when he was in the studio system, but Hitchcock used them quite interesting. So Borgus Weems having one of the Hitchcock alumni in the episode makes it work. If Ray Milland was not there, this would not have worked, in my personal opinion. So this is the latest on our Night Gallery podcast. Let us know how you feel about them. We'll like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, there's no end to the Night Gallery, and I'm going to be getting into maybe some of the scripts that weren't done, that were left over. I've done a previous podcast, but actually I found more out of Scott Skelton's book. I'm going to talk about that in the future. Some interesting concepts, as we say. Thanks for listening. Bye.